Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time from busy schedules, challenging schedules, I'm sure, for all of you, to attend IISE's monthly webinar focused on business continuity strategies and tactics in periods of major disruption. And we're pleased today to have two presidents of IISE, Jim Tompkins, chairman of Tompkins International, the past president of IISE, served around the same time that I did back in the 90s, and David Poirier, who's the current president of IISE and CEO of the Poirier Group. I want to also thank our partners. We have a number of IISE professional and student chapters that are partnering with us on this series of webinars that we're doing to help people think through and understand how to manage through this storm we're experiencing. And also IISE's professional affinity groups, the Young Professionals Group, the Industry Advisory Board, and the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers, and also the Association for Corporate Growth in Toronto. A couple of just quick logistics things. There will be a webinar recording that will be made available to you after the session. You'll get an email from us, and there'll be a link to that. If you're interested in the presentation, a PDF of the presentation, you can download it during the webinar. It's a handout. Once the webinar is ended, then you won't have access to it. So I'd encourage you to download that during the webinar if that's something that you're interested in doing. If questions, there's a chat window. You can ask questions anytime you want. We'll be monitoring them. I don't know that we'll get to them during the webinar, but we will answer all questions. We'll follow up with an email afterwards, and we'll have a list of questions with answers. And we'll provide some contact information for both Jim and Dave at the end of the session. This is our agenda. Jim will be our primary presenter today, and he'll be talking to you about things like he's going to talk about bugs with you, and he's going to talk about things like VUCA. So he's got some interesting concepts and ideas that I think you'll find very useful as you work with your organizations to manage through this period of disruption. Now I'm going to pass the baton to Dave, and then let him pass the baton to Jim. Dave? Oh my God, Dave? Dave, you there?
Yes. Good afternoon to most of you, and good morning to some of you that are on the West Coast. Apologize for that delay there. I'm glad to be with you today as both the CEO of the Poirier Group and the president of the Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers. As some of you may be well aware, IISE is working really hard to bring value to our members and customers in these difficult times. And the ACG is also working diligently for its members, and they've joined us in sponsoring this webinar today. We know people are struggling with the current situation, and everybody's hungry for insights about the path forward and what we're going to be facing. Scott and I want to leverage thought leaders in our profession, and Jim Tompkins was the first person that came to mind when we discussed it. As many of you know, Jim, as chairman of Tompkins International, has an amazing global perspective on trends and challenges, which I'm sure you're going to enjoy and learn from. And I'm privileged to be working today with two past presidents of IISE, with Scott and Jim. They've contributed enormously to the Institute and to the profession. So we welcome back those of you who have joined us last week, and where we spoke about navigating the business through COVID crisis. And we also welcome the newcomers from IISE and the ACG network. So let me begin by emphasizing that there are four key factors to be managed through the crisis and the recovery curve. Those are strategy, process, technology, and people. Each one of these things is critical, and many of you are aware of each one of those things. But equally important and of equal criticality is the linking and alignment between them. And so you're going to hear a lot about that through what Jim has to say. On this slide, there are 5 words that I believe are absolutely essential to successfully managing the storm and recovery. Alignment, visibility, communication, alignment, visibility, accountability, and discipline. And we'll come back to these after Jim has a talk. But we're going to pass it over to Jim now to hear his viewpoint on things. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Scott, and pleasure to be here, and really appreciate the great job that Dave and Scott did on April 7th on kind of the first part of this series where they addressed navigating your business through COVID crisis, and I thought that was very, very, very useful. I need to provide a little context as to why I'm providing an alternative title. If you go back 35 days, I was taking 2 airplane rides. I was returning from a material handling conference in Atlanta and going on elsewhere, and was just living my normal life. That was 35 days ago. 25 days ago, Scott called and said that he would like to have me join Dave and him on a webinar talking about business continuity strategies and tactics in periods of major disruption. Well, that was 25 days ago. It was about 4 years ago, because the amount of things that have happened that 25 days is just enough to spin my head. 23 days ago, I read online that the state of North Carolina, where I live, was going into a stay-at-home order. And I asked my wife, what is a stay-at-home order? I didn't know. And so that was 23 days ago. There's been huge changes in my life in the last 23 days, and there's been huge changes in the last 7 days since Scott and Dave spoke. Huge changes in the last 25 days since Scott and Dave asked me to participate. If I look at this title today, I need to update it, and that's why we have an alternative title. And this title is actually kind of an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about why we must do reinvention. I'm going to talk about VUCA. In fact, I think the reason Scott and Dave thought of me to participate in this webinar series is a year ago at the IISE convention, I presented a keynote for the industrial track on what's going on, and I talked about VUCA, and people didn't know the words, and I was going to keynote this year's New Orleans annual conference, and I was going to spend time on VUCA. I now will do that, hopefully on November 1st or 2nd or 3rd or whatever the date is, right after Halloween this year. But VUCA is critical that we understand the impacts that has on our companies, on ourselves, and on our profession. Then I want to talk a little bit about innovative disruption, and I want to talk about crisis disruption, 2 different things. But if you combine those 4 thoughts, reinvention, VUCA, innovative disruption, crisis disruption, it's beyond belief the impacts that is having on businesses. The things that are taking place right now, where they're saying we're going to hit a record for unemployment in June of 13%. White-collar layoffs is spread all across the front page of today's Wall Street Journal. Record number of bank loans coming up in the second quarter. Global recession is going to be down. The gross national products will be down 3% in year 2020. So just unbelievable the impacts this is having. Interestingly, I'm not going to claim that I predicted COVID-19 because I certainly did not. In fact, I just learned how to pronounce coronavirus and pandemic and COVID in the last 15 days. Didn't even know the words other than casual news account I read from time to time. And now we're saying, oh my. This is the most dynamic, uncertain time that we've ever lived in because of this terrible disease. But on December 5th, I presented a webinar on the impacts of VUCA and the beyond belief impacts it was having. Now, I didn't predict COVID-19, but I very well did predict what was happening with respect to the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity of today's business and today's supply chains. So to begin the discussion, I need to begin with a little disclaimer in that everything I talk about here did not come from any clients. All client information is confidential. Everything that I'm going to share with you today is something that I dreamed up all by myself. I made this stuff up, and I think it's based on our understanding of the profession of industrial engineering. So I want to begin with a bug story. This is the first word in the new title, reinvention. We need to really get reinvention. And reinvention is really a bug story that allows us to understand what we're doing. Scott, I'm not able to index it.
Okay, I'll do.
Okay. I don't know why I can't, but I can. So if you could fix that, it'd be good. So a bug story, there's three types of bugs. There's ametroboly, hemimetroboly, and holometroboly. We know the words a, hemi, and holo from Latin, where a means not, hemi means partial, and holo means total. And so if we look at different types of bugs, boy, it'd be nice if I could index this. I think I now did it. So if we're talking about ametroboly, which means no metamorphosis, what we're seeing is the example of an ant. You have a baby ant, then you have an adult ant. The ant gets bigger, it grows, but the fact of the matter is no change in the ant. The baby ant and the adult ant are the same. To the contrary, if instead of looking at ants, we look at, instead of ametroboly, we look at hemimetroboly, we go from continuous improvement to transformation, we see the example there is a grasshopper. And with a grasshopper, what happens is it's indexing slowly. But what we see is the grasshopper baby is totally different than the adult grasshopper. Well, not totally different, but it has changes. And so it's partial metamorphosis. It's semi-metamorphosis, semi-metroboly. And so what the changes we see is the adult grasshopper has wings. The baby grasshopper doesn't even have wings. It doesn't even have wing sockets. The adult grasshopper has reproductive organs. The baby grasshopper doesn't have not working reproduction. It has no reproductive organs. And so there is a semi-metamorphosis. And so there's a semi-change taking place here. If we look at the third category, the reinvention, which, Scott, I need help. Okay, with the reinvention, what we have is the holometamorphosis, and the obvious example here is a caterpillar. And the caterpillar is little dust-sucking worms. When the kids see them, they go, oh, yucky, caterpillars. But then one night, the caterpillar goes to sleep. He wakes up in the dark. He eats himself out of the cocoon, and he becomes a beautiful butterfly. And now the kids chase him in the air and say, oh, beautiful butterfly. It's a total metamorphosis. And so we industrial engineers, we believe in continuous improvement, we believe in transformation, and we believe in reinvention. The key is that we have to use the right tool at the right time. So we begin with a successful story, and that's ametroboly. And what we do is we continuously improve that. This is at the core of our profession. When we get to that successful company that now is disrupted by a new product or service, what we find, if all we do is continuous improvement there, we'll go bankrupt. But instead, if we climb to a hemimetroboly, a transformation of that business, we will grow the success we had before, which will be fine unless we reach an environment where we have a total business model disruption. If we have a total business model disruption, if what we do is continuous improvement and transformation, we will file bankruptcy. But if we have a holy metroboly, we reinvent ourselves, we then are going to have greater success, and that butterfly then leads back to the successful loop. And so what we will find is that at some times, as great industrial and systems engineers, we will do continuous improvement. At times, we'll do transformation, and at times, we'll do reinvention. I would suggest to you today, if what you do in the aftermath of COVID-19, if what you do today during the COVID-19 crises is anything but holometroboly, anything but reinvention, you are not going to adequately survive. And so this is a time for reinvention, not for continuous improvement and not for transformation. The second portion of the title that I had was the title of Continuity, Planning, Resilience, and VUCA. Continuity planning, we all know, is the process of creating systems that can handle major threats and major problems. Resilience is the ability of an organization to adapt. It's our ability to bounce after we're hit with certain types of risks. And then VUCA is the one that people sometimes don't get. VUCA is a term that was actually invented in 1987 by the U.S. Army War College. It was invented because the administration and the politicians saw a need to think about things differently. When the Berlin Wall was going to fall, when Soviet Union was going to fall, it was a different world. And says we have to come up with a new way of thinking. And so they came up with the acronym VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And with taking a VUCA view of what was going on, we would manage our affairs differently. I would suggest to you that in today's environment, if what you do is continuity planning, if what you do is resilience, you will not do well. We are facing the greatest uncertainty in the history of man. We need to approach this with VUCA. So the two key things we need to begin with is we're going to talk about reinvention and we're going to talk about VUCA. Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper into VUCA and the V for volatility. It has to do with the nature of change. Nature has to do with the type of change and has to do with the magnitude of change. It has to do with the speed of change. Things are happening so quickly. I hear people say, wouldn't it be great if it was like the old days? Well, yeah, it would be great if it's like the old days, but that's not happening. The level of change is unbelievable, and the frequency of change is huge. And so what we can see is that change can be self-induced. That's proactive. It can be reactive, where change is brought about by the competitors, or what we can find is that the change is occurring from some external factor, be it a tornado or a tsunami or a pandemic or a recession or a huge out things that we need to look at. If we look at the U of the uncertainty, what we see, it's the lack of predictability. Like I've said 3 times already, these are the most uncertain times in the history of the world. The uncertainty makes it impossible to make accurate predictions or to define operating requirements. If we don't have the operating requirements, what does an industrial engineer do? He's in trouble. Because what we do is we define requirements and then we optimize the solution. If you don't have predictable or usable operating requirements, you cannot optimize. And in fact, I would suggest to you that the new optimum solution is options. And so I'm not focusing any longer in the age of COVID-19 of trying to optimize my solution. I'm trying to develop optionality, where I have a series of solutions, scenario planning, if you will, where I can talk about, I'm going to go with this solution now, but then I'm going to translate to this if this happens. I'm going to translate to this if this happens. I'm going to translate to this. And I have a scenario given the high level of uncertainty of what's going on. And so what I would say is that this VUCA thing is changing our profession. C stands for complexity, the multiplex of forces and confronting issues. I believe that we're living in a time where there's a lack of cause and effect. Big data, nice try, it's bad data because we have uncertainty. The whole thing of regression or correlation coefficients is irrelevant because the future is not based on the past. We don't know what's happening. We have a blurring of roles being played throughout the supply chain. I used to know, I can recall back in 1977, I taught a course called Industrial Distribution at NC State, and I would spend the first week talking about the different roles of play. What does a retailer do? What does a wholesaler do? What does a manufacturer do? What does a distributor do? And I went through all those definitions so people would understand what today we call supply chain. But those things are blurred. I mean, what is Kroger? If you ask my mom what was Kroger, Mom would say, "Shell, that was a grocery store." Well, Kroger is a grocery store. It's got stores. It also is an online store. It's also a manufacturer. They make more private labels than any other grocery chain. It's also a wholesaler. I mean, Kroger is selling on Alibaba. they are wholesaling to Alibaba, who's selling the product. And so what we find is these definitions are blurred. And so some of I love the numbers to say, well, 9% of the sales this year is going to be online. What do you mean online? Is that where they place the order, or is that where they shop? If you're looking at where people shop, 90% of all sales are online. Now, 10% of those consummated online, 90% are consummated in the store, but shopping is online. I mean, we got to get through that. The complexity of commerce is blurring everything. Companies used to need to sell in their store, they need to sell on their website, but now they're selling on other people's websites, or they're filling for people's orders from other websites. They're selling on marketplaces, and they're selling on a multitude of marketplaces, because this marketplace sells really well for older guys. This marketplace sells really well for younger guys. This marketplace sells for older women. This marketplace sells for younger women. This marketplace sells well for this demographic and that demographic. And so what we need to do is understand you have to have the ability to sell anywhere, and what that does is create a hugely complex supply chain. And then if you look at the A of VUCA, we're talking about ambiguity, where it's the haziness of reality. There's really great opportunity to make misreads on things. Look at the misreads which are making around the world on COVID-19. Watch the TV every night, and there's a different view of where we are right now. No one can agree what needs to happen. And it's an amazing time of ambiguity. And so I think what we need to do is say, every day there's a new revelation. Every day there's a new view of what should happen, what shouldn't happen, and we're all wrong. Anybody who makes a prediction is going to be wrong because we don't know. The evolution of the new era of digital commerce is creating an additional era of uncertainty. Because, where would we be without our ability to do ride sharing? If I don't know how to travel without Uber, although I'm not traveling now, so Uber is basically out of business. So how does that work? I think we need to see this ambiguity as in the speed of the marketplace of what the customer wants. I've seen people spend hundreds of millions of dollars developing a e-commerce supply chain so they could hit 2-day delivery. Well, guess what? 2-day delivery isn't what some people want anymore. People in major cities want same-day delivery. People in smaller cities want next-day delivery, and then people in the rural areas will accept 2 days. It's a different game. And so there's an ongoing evolution of expectations that we feel we have to meet. And so what we see with VUCA is a tremendous amount of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity that's just driving the world crazy. There is an interesting view, though, and VUCA 2.0 is not well known, but it should be. It's done by Professor Bill George at Harvard, and what he says is that there's a different VUCA. We'll call it 2.0. And he says V, instead of standing for volatility, what we should is we have to have vision. What is the vision that we're going to present, that we're going to move forward in? The U stands, instead of for uncertainty, about understanding. Let's understand what we understand, and let's understand the options for what we don't understand. But let's really understand the circumstance. C is not for complexity, but it's for courage. It's not a time to cower down and not be brave and move forward with vigor. It's a time to have courage, and we really, really, really need to have courage moving forward. And then fourth, when we look at the A instead of ambiguity, it says be aware of the fact that the uncertainty is huge, and therefore all of our solutions must be adaptable. So VUCA is volatility, it is uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, but it's also vision, understanding, courage, and adaptable. And I think we need to look at both definitions. Okay, so that gives us the first two of the new title, Reinvention and VUCA. Let's now talk about innovative disruption. And innovative disruption is disruption that is done either by you or by someone else. If you create the disruption, then you're disrupting others. But if others create the innovation, then they are disrupting you. If we look at the cycle of innovation. And Scott, if we could just push a whole bunch of buttons here until we get the whole graphic, and then I can talk through the whole graphic. The disruption cycle begins with innovation and then goes to entrepreneurship and disruption. But sometimes that doesn't work. People are a little bit nervous, and so it's too risky, too different, and those flow down to the rest in peace. But those who are bold, those who have courage, will pursue the disruption cycle. And the disruption cycle begins by disrupting what's going on and then taking your new ideas and doing incubation. That's testing them, refining the ideas, making the mistakes. Then it goes through validation, and then we establish a new status quo. Push the button a few more times, Scott, for me. And so we get the new status quo, and then from what the new status quo becomes professional management. Then we have the established firm, but the established firm sometimes says, I am the number one in the world. I'm doing the best at this. I'm going to keep doing what I do because this is really, really, really important, and I'm not going to change. And they resist the change, and that goes back to the rest in peace. But if we have that new innovation, because this is now the beginning of the new cycle of the disruption cycle, and have courageous leadership and new boldness, we then go around the circle again. Push it one more time for me, Scott. And now what we see is the circle continues to rotate. And what we're experiencing is the rate of innovative disruption is speeding up. It's getting faster, 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 faster. We used to go around the circle about once every 20 to 30 years. Therefore, you didn't see innovative disruption because it only occurred to you once in your career. But now what we're seeing is we're seeing innovative disruption occurring literally now monthly. I talked to a guy last night who's got a 3D printing machine that's printing medically perfect face masks. And he's now, since none of the dentists are using their 3D printers, they're using their adaptive manufacturing capabilities to print these masks, because the dentists aren't seeing any patients. And so they've networked that in a cloud environment, and they're now producing masks and have a distributed logistics environment. So just so cool, the innovations that we are bringing about that is disrupting the business. And so this, hopefully, you're on the proactive side of that. You're disrupting the industry. Unfortunately, you know who the number one disruptor in the world today is? It's Amazon. And you know who the number one group that Amazon is disrupting? It's Amazon. They're disrupting themselves. That's what Jeff Bezos means when he says every day is day one. It's day one again. We're starting over again. We're starting the cycle over again. Innovation, innovative disruption on the next slide, we see that it's based upon being innovative and bold. We see it's a very high stakes game that has high rewards. The thing about high stakes is people think high stakes and they right away think high risk. No, no, no. High risk is not doing the disruption cycle. If you have a resistance to change and you say, well, this is how I've always done it here, I'm not going to change. Well, you're toast. It's done. What we need to do is we need to understand that the high stakes game is the low risk game. Getting on the disruption cycle is the low risk. Staying off the disruption cycle is high risk. The innovative disruption is the process of changing the world, an innovation, a disruption at time. And that came from Steve Jobs. So it's not an exact quote, so I didn't exactly quote him, but that's what he's talked about. What we're going to do is we're not going to have this huge flash that's going to change. We're going to do a little change, a little change, and a little change, and we're going to disrupt the world a little change at a time. The next slide I have taken from Dave and Scott's presentation because it says it so well. And what this talks about is crisis disruption. So we've now talked about innovative disruption. Let's now talk about crisis disruption. Crisis disruption is, as you all know, is a black swan event. It's something that was highly improbable. It's something we're surprised by. It's something that is changing everything. And it's something that after we get through it, from hindsight, we say, I should have thought of that. I think it's amazing the number of companies that in 2011, when the tsunami hit that Japanese island, where they said, we're going to do a better job of having alternative sources identified. We're going to exercise those alternative sources. We're going to have better supply chain visibility, la, 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 la. And now here we are again. what we've done is we said we have just-in-time inventory. We need to optimize the cost. We're going to reduce redundant suppliers. We're going to go all with one supplier, all in. And now we find ourselves in an environment where we don't have predictability of supply, which is even made worse because we don't have predictability of demand. So the white swan event is what's really important. And so what we see with crisis disruption, there's global, which is a pandemic, it's a recession, it's a depression, it's a supply chain. It could be local, where it's just a tornado or earthquake or tsunami or something, or it could be just a local supply chain issue. If we go back to that slide, we also could see there's a point beyond that, that there's a potential of it being regional. It could be, a particular a plant that has a fire, but that affects our ability to produce for a given region in the world. It could be a business merger and acquisition, or it could be a closing of a plant. It could be a lot of different things. And so what we see is that the disruptions which are occurring at businesses for the last 20 years, each year has set a new record, be it a recession or a tornado or mergers and acquisitions or fires or reorganizations or spinoffs and so forth. It's just unbelievable, the global, the regional, and the local crises that are taking place. And so I would suggest this is disruption beyond belief. It's the highest level of innovative disruption of all times. It's the highest level of global crisis disruption, at least during my life, the last 50 years. And it is, in fact, VUCA at the top, over the top. And so what we are seeing is the requirement for reinvention to respond to innovative disruption, global disruption, and VUCA. So huge, 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 huge impact. So with that background, we now find ourselves saying, okay, how do we help? What do industrial and systems engineers do to make things better? And as I thought deep and hard on that, I realized that it's not one size fits all. There's different types of companies, different types of positions. And Scott and Dave did a great job of getting that thought process rolling, as how do we think about different companies? And as I thought about it, I realized there's two major factors we have to look at. The first one is, how is the company doing as we entered COVID-19? Okay, and so the question basically, how is your company doing in December of 2019? Before we even knew the word COVID-19, how were you doing? And here I present 10 factors that we can talk about quickly. I mean, what was your financial position? Were you strong? What's your customer relationship? Was it great? What is your planning? Has it been robust? What is the execution? Do you have great performance? What is your unique value proposition, and is all your people aligned with those things? If you have all of these doing well, then you're a strong company. If you have all of these going poorly, then you're a weak company. And then there's 5 more factors on the next page. Just quickly again, do you have high energy? Is the company have a passion for energy? Is there a spirit of innovation that takes place, or are we protecting the past? Do we have leadership that's high integrity and really, really provides open communication? Do we have teamwork? And here, teamwork, it has to be with all three: customers, suppliers, and staff. I see some companies that do great with customers, but they forget about suppliers and staff. I see some people great job with staff. They don't do so well with customer and supply. You have to do a great job in all three. And then the last topic, which Dave and Scott covered very well last week, is on the subject of culture. And the big one I want to highlight here is the issue of intolerance for mediocrity. Many of the big companies in the world today have a tolerance for mediocrity. It's okay to sit back and say, well, I think there's some risk associated with, come on, get off it, get it on. You gotta do something quickly. And in this COVID time, if there's a person that's sitting around your committee room poo-pooing every idea, throw them out the window. You don't need that person to drag you down. You need to have decisiveness and speed in this COVID period. The second thing I looked at is, okay, so the first thing to look at is how are you doing in December of 2019? You're a strong company or a weak company, and you come up with a feeling for that and how you're doing. And then the second issue has nothing to do with what you're doing. It has to do in what sector you're in. And that's just something that happens to you. There's the haves, drugstores. The drugstores are up 4% in sales in March and April. And so there's good sales taking place in drug. Home furnishings, it depends on the sector. But if you're selling home office stuff, goodness sakes, everyone's buying desks and electronic equipment for the home, trying to outfit the kids. They're finding a need for additional storage units, and so shelving and boxes and all that stuff is going well. E-commerce is obviously, and delivery is up. Janitorial service is way up because people want to do a whole new level of sanitation. Grocery stores up 27%. So we all know that. You can't buy some of the basic essentials. Pharmaceutical is up. Security is up. Since the offices are all empty, the factories are all empty, we got to increase security. A streaming service. We're all sitting at home, so we're watching Netflix. Walmart, Target, and Costco are really doing well. And then because of all the COVID challenges, spirits and wine is way up. It's a great business to be in these days. However, on the other side is some very sad stories. The airlines, the airports, the TSA screening people, churches, cruise lines, engineering services or consulting, which is based upon capital expenditures and what's called discretionary services, just like advertising is way down. Events, conventions, trade shows. Oh my. My wife and I had tickets to go see the Stones. We had tickets to go see Michael Bublé or whatever his name was. I wanted to see the Stones. She wanted to see this Michael Bublé guy. So both got canceled. Fitness centers, spas, haircuts. I'm glad this isn't on the screen today as a podcast. Our hair is hanging out all over the place. Ladies don't have their fingernails done. Food and beverage, restaurants down 27%. Hospitality, including Airbnb, no one's doing it. And in-store retail, malls, and luxuries down 8%. Sporting goods down 23%. Oh my. Read this morning in the paper that Dick's wasn't able to pay their rent last month. That's terrible. Dick's is a great company, extremely well managed, but they have not. And so, no one thought about it in this way, but we got to think about it in this way because this is a big issue. And so from a path forward point of view, here's a quote that came from Dave and Scott's webinar last week that I just thought was I must have read this 50 times, literally, because I really want to make sure I get this. And I don't know who the quote is from, but it says the guy's name there. And it says, and once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure that the storm is really over. My wife is so eager to get me out of the house and go back to work. They say 9 months from now we're going to have a record number of babies, and we're going to have 4 months from now a record number of divorces. It's a crazy time. But my wife, for 53 wonderful years we've been married, she's been very patient with me. And if you ask her, to what do you attribute your 53 years of marriage? She said, he travels. He's gone. And so when I'm home, it's special. But I've been home now for, 25 days straight. She's going crazy. But then the quote says, but one thing is certain. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what the storm is all about. Wow. Thanks, Scott and Dave, for this quote. This one has a real impact on me. And so we look now at the slide that kind of tells the story. We show here innovative disruption, which can be continuous improvement, transformation, or reinvention. It can be an ant, it can be a grasshopper, it can be a butterfly. We have the crisis disruption, which can be a tornado that hit a local area. It could be regional, a union strike that affects a given area, or it may be global, such as the pandemic we're going through now. The fact of the matter is, the first row and the second row don't matter. That's not what we're talking about. We are in the third row. We must do reinvention because COVID-19 affects everything. We must deal with we are dealing with a global pandemic. So where we are is we're on the reinvention global. We're on the third row. And so in the third row, there's four cases. There's weak economy, weak economic performance, there's weak companies, and there's strong companies. And then they're for the haves and for the have-nots. And so you can look at where you are and how were you doing in December. Were you weak or were you strong? Or were you someplace in between? And are you a have or are you a have-not? And based on that, we have one of four choices of what we can do. If we look at the next page, I state these very explicitly. And so if we entered COVID-19, next point please, as a weak business, and you are a have sector, you must pursue doom to boom. Why starting in doom? Because you were weak in December. But now you have huge opportunity because you have to really put the pedal to the metal and boom. If you entered COVID-19 as a weak business, but you have not, it's doom to tomb. I'm sorry, I hate to be so black and white. I don't mean to be the one to tell you that the patient is dying, but if you were weak in December of 19 and you have not, you're done. The company is over. You need to get real. I can't imagine the anguish that the doctor in a war zone must face when they bring in these young soldiers and they have to do triage and decide this one we can save, this one we can't. I would hate that job. Unfortunately, I'm doing it right now about businesses. And we have to have the courage to step up and say, this is not going to work. It's not quitting. It's facing reality. The third factor is when we have a strong business and your sector is a have sector, man, it's boom to boom. Look at Walmart. My. It's just exploding. It was doing great in December, and now it's doing double great. It's really, really sailing. And that's not an easy job. None of these are easy jobs. It's a very difficult job. And number four is you had a strong business going into 2020, and you have not. You need to take the foot off the gas pedal. You need to take a step back and allow yourself to hibernate, to wait for the better day to come. And so we have four states to look at: doom to boom, doom to tomb, boom to boom, and boom to hibernate. The first two, doom to boom, excuse me, not the first two, the two that have to do with boom. So doom to boom and boom to boom. I changed the order before I changed the slide. These two both have the boom outcome. The only difference is if you're in doom to boom, you need to really watch the cash. Where if you're in boom to boom, you've got the cash. But other than that, the 10 steps of what you need to do to be successful are the same. And so if we look at the 10 steps quickly, you need to have a vision. You need to focus on the customer. You need to hire additional sales and marketing staff. That's the only way you're going to get the boom. You're not going to get the boom unless you do that. You got to protect your key staff players, and you got to protect your suppliers. So you see we have right there in the top four: customer, staff, and suppliers. You got to have a good financial plan. You got to assure you got an accountable organizational structure and the right people in the right seats. You got to reorganize as needed. You got to accelerate and remove barriers to speed, and you got to be agile and responsive. You need to develop a ramp plan for the business and for the supply chains. You need to then go. You need to put these 9 things in place, and then you have to work the hardest you've ever worked in your life. Because meeting the requirements of the community, and you're a have, you've got a huge job in front of you with demand that's going to hit levels that you've never even thought about hitting. And so it's a real challenging job to be a doom to boom or to be a boom to boom. The next slide has to do with the doom to tomb. And this is the hard one. This is the difficult one to talk about. I think we need to have the courage and the honesty to face this, though. And so here you need to agree you're going to dissolve. You need to get a good attorney, a good accountant to make sure you do this correctly. Most of us aren't very good at closing things down. I don't have much experience at all with it. We need to develop a plan for dissolution. We've got to have a timetable. We've got to share that plan with our employees and our customers. We got to make sure that we cancel financial commitments and we uphold our fiduciary responsibility, and we collect the AR, we pay the AP, we take care of debt, we take care of selling assets. We got to close out with the bank, the state, the IRS, local agencies, and then we got to distribute remaining cash and assets to the people that they are beholden to. Not an easy discussion, but if you talk about COVID-19 and you don't face this reality, I think we're lying. We're not really being as helpful as we can be. The last one is doom to hibernate. This is an important strategy because you have been doing well. Marriott Hotel has been just doing awesome. But now they have thousands of hotels that are closed. They have thousands of hotels, tens of thousands of hotels that work on minimal staff. And they've laid off 2/3 of their white collar team, their executive team in Maryland, because they have to conserve cash. And so what we have to do with someone that's in a hibernate mode is we gotta just push the timeout button, and we gotta have the ability to live for another day and kick the can down the road. And so this is very difficult to maintain good customer relationship, maintain the revenue, and see how you can grow it. Reduce cost right to the minimum. You got to cut. You have to assure the financial stability and the liquidity. You're going to face times where the banks are going to not allow you to withdraw the credit line you have, and you're going to find your credit line's going to get smaller just at the time you need it. But what we read in the Wall Street Journal today is that there's going to be a record number of bank defaults on loans in the second quarter. And therefore, the banks are going into hibernation. They're not making new loans. They're not honoring the loans that they have made. We got to establish a hibernation plan. We got to communicate that plan to the employees. We got to make sure we maintain our brand reputation. We got to do the right thing. We got to be optimistic, but we have to stay alert to everything that's occurring. We got to look for new opportunities. We got to look for when is the right time to come out of hibernation. Let's not come out a day too late. Let's really have our hands on it. And how do we do that in a way that makes sense? I think it's interesting, the governors and the president and lots of political discussion on reopening the economy. If you want to reopen the economy, it's not about governors and presidents. It's not about politics. It's about the supply chain. Do you have the staff? Do you have the raw material? Do you have the things that you need? There's a transportation infrastructure you need to get the job done. Are these things in place? It's a very complex thing to start up a supply chain that's been closed or one that's been taken down to 20% of its prior capacity. And so we really need to make sure that we are ready to come out of hibernation, and we have a plan for that. We exit hibernation, and then we make that happen and go. So Reinvention Requirement that we do that is industrial and systems engineers. That's what we do. VUCA, dealing with volatility, uncertainties, complexity, and ambiguity. We understand that, and we understand that optimization is no longer is valid. Innovation, that's a result of this digital commerce environment. Crisis that's here in the pandemic at an unbelievable level produces unbelievable impacts to us all. So my closing thoughts to you all is, is number one, please be safe. Really important that we all pay attention to the rules and guidelines. Count our blessings. We still live in a great country and an economy that I believe soon is going to be coming back, and I think we need to really focus on the good parts of what we can do and the blessings for our capabilities as engineers to do good. We got to realize that how you respond to these difficult times will impact the rest of your life. We will, until we die, we will be telling people about COVID-19 and the impacts it had on us. This is kind of like my parents' discussion of the Depression, and they all had this kind of a taste in the back of their mouth that if they tasted it daily. We're going to remember COVID-19 for the long time. This is a time of beyond belief, but it is reality. I think the key to success is that we play the hand you were dealt, and you play it like it's the hand that you wanted, because you know why? We don't have a choice. This is the hand we're dealt. So given that we're dealt this hand, what are we going to do? How are we going to help our company? How are we going to help our family? What are we going to do to make this really work? And then a quote, I don't know where it came from, but I picked it up years ago, and I've always kind of liked it, is success is a ladder. We always talk about the ladder of success. So success is a ladder that cannot be climbed with your hands in your pockets. Industrial and systems engineers, it's time to get the hands out of the pockets and get it on. I thank Scott and Dave and IISE for giving me the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I tell you, it's an amazing time for you and I to be living, because we're getting to learn some of the biggest lessons of all time, and I think that's really cool. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Jim. Dave, would you like to close out for us, and then?
Yes, I would. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks so much, Jim, for all the insights, and always so thought-provoking. I really appreciate it. Now I want to get back to these 5 words, and I really believe that they are critical words to focus on in following the paths that Jim has outlined to you. For communication, we're working at a much faster pace than we have before, and we're going to need to work even faster going forward. So communication has to keep up with that, not only in the speed of communication, but the effectiveness of the communication. And keep in mind, communication is two-way. In alignment, we've got to get clear on where we're going, as Jim had outlined, and the choice of paths, the optionality that we have going forward, and make sure that everybody is aware of those plans and understand which is plan A and which is plan B. In visibility, it's really about focusing on measurement and feedback and monitoring of what's happening in the marketplace and within your operations and with your people. And accountability, get clear on roles and responsibilities, but also the contribution of each individual in each group within your organization. And discipline is about being disciplined, not rigid, as I've spoken about before. And the analogy that I talked about is having a look at a great sports team. If you look at them, they're highly disciplined, but they're not rigid. If they were rigid, they would be predictable and they would lose. But the reason why they win is because they're highly disciplined and adaptive to the challenges that they're facing. On the next slide, we've got some key points for you. And these are really points in thinking about how you're going to exit the storm. And just to outline some of them, the first one is really on communication. It's about preserving, which is recovering or growing or maintaining the top line by focusing first and foremost on the key customers, making sure that you have that trust out with the customers. You rebuild the trust if you have lost them during this period of time, but maintain that trust by understanding their evolving needs and behaviors. Why I say evolving needs and behaviors is it's really critical for you to understand that these needs and behaviors are changing, particularly with consumers. They say it takes 21 days to form a habit. It takes 66 days to have that habit become automatic and permanent. And we're going to be facing that where people's patterns and behaviors are changing permanently going forward, which will change their needs from us. Likewise with companies that we're serving. The second one, really being adaptive, and that's really around scenario planning and optionality. The third one is really about visibility, monitoring and responding to market and competitive dynamics, keeping a handle on your customers, on your competitors, and behaviors that are changing. The fourth one is really around strategy, creating scenarios so that everybody is aware of the paths forward, where you're going, where you want to end up. The fifth one is alignment. So make sure that everybody is aligned on the financial and operational plans and they've been stress tested, that the supply chain can deliver what's being promised to your customers, and revisit those target plannings and be very transparent on operational, cash, and financial positioning to your key stakeholders, whether they be suppliers or shareholders or customers or employees. And the sixth one is really about discipline. Maintain that rigorous cost control that you maintain through the storm, and instill that disciplined but agile focus to procurement and supply chain. The final point is really emphasize and demonstrate your core values and operating principles. This is walking the talk in this hurry up mode. And often it's forgotten when a company feels like they're in somewhere between urgency and emergency. Make sure that accountability is clear to promote integrity and trust in all you do, so that you maintain that alignment of your workforce, your customers, and your suppliers, and your investors in the business. So I'm going to pass it back to Scott now for a little wrap-up.
Thanks, Dave. Wanted to thank IISE for hosting this webinar. As Dave mentioned at the outset, IISE is committed to serving its members and customers, and we're working hard to do what Jim talked about, reinvent ourselves and find ways to bring value to our members and customers. And so we represent well over 250,000 practicing industrial and systems engineers in the United States and Canada and North America. And so I wanted to thank IISE for being innovative with these webinars. Wanted to let you know quickly about upcoming on the 22nd of April. We have an interesting opportunity for you. We're going to be focusing on three very interesting projects that we've done in the greater Columbus area, and the focus of this webinar is on principles and tools to ensure, I said optimal, and I guess that they were focusing on optimal, but I like Jim's new word for us, process improvement. And I think these tools that we're going to share with you that the students have done with their capstone senior design projects are relevant and salient tools and methods and principles regardless of the conditions we find ourselves in. So the registration link is down there at the bottom for you if you're interested in that. And then another webinar that we've set up for you, IISE has set up for you on the 12th of May with Steve Savoy, who is the Senior Manager of IE Process and Integration for GM. He's going to talk a little bit about rapid deployment and execution of IISE principles and methods, and specifically talk about the work that GM's done with their partner to create a new facility to ramp up the production of critical care ventilators in Kokomo, Indiana. So many of you asked questions that I think in the April 7th webinar that I think Steve is going to speak to. And then we're continuing, IISE is continuing to identify topics on a basis of feedback that you give us as participants. And so we've got Ben Amaba and Jared Frederici, who are going to talk to you in May, I believe the 19th, about the role of data and information and engineered management systems during periods of disruption. So we're sort of peeling the onion back, so to speak, and zooming in on specific aspects of how we manage through the front, middle, and back end of the storm, so to speak. And tentatively, I'm working to get Jim Dobson, Senior Manager of Industrial Engineering for Disney, who's also a member of the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers and a member of IISE. and have him talk to us in a very generic fashion about some of the things Jim talked about today, just the logistics, planning, and execution in front, middle, backside of businesses like Disney. I guess, Jim, Disney would be in hibernate phase in some respects, at least most of their business, right?
That is correct. Yeah, their stores are closed and the parks are closed.
Yeah, and the ship and the cruise lines, of course, and so forth. And then the other webinar that we're planning to put together for you is People and Performance Management in Virtual Conditions. We find ourselves operating in much different situations than we normally would, and that'll be set up for sometime late May. So that's upcoming. IISE is working hard to find ways to help you think through and manage through this difficult time. And we appreciate you taking time from busy schedules today. Thanks again to Jim and Dave for taking time from their schedules to share with you. And you all please be safe and stay healthy. Thank you.